Welcome to Echo Africa. Nice to have you with us. The COP26 Climate Change Conference is currently underway in Glasgow, Scotland. And once again, world leaders are grappling over what must be done to curb global warming.
That is right, Chris. It has been 6 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted. Its goal was to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. But according to the last UN report, we are heading for a rise of 2.7 degrees. We will look at some of the ramifications of that and more in today's show. Coming up. In Ghana, plastic waste is being used to build attractive housing. Scientists in Albania are trying to restore marine habitats. And Senegal is taking action to combat coastal erosion. It is unlikely that a single corner of our blue planet has failed to feel the effects of the climate crisis, but the severity of the situation can vary greatly depending on where you live. Africa, for instance, is responsible for only a fraction of global carbon emissions, but it is bearing the brunt of the consequences. Let us take a closer look at some of the climate-related problems that Africa is currently facing.
Droughts in southern Africa, locust plagues in the east, and the first recorded tropical cyclone to hit Somalia, bringing death and displacing thousands. Climate change has arrived in every inhabited region of the planet, but especially in Africa. And its impact is devastating.
This is about life and death because we are experiencing continuous losses and damage and other impacts associated with droughts, floods. And we're not talking about things which are in the air, we're talking about food. So one of the major issues that we are having threats and to having no food for very many people.
The last remaining glaciers in Africa are expected to have melted by 2040. Rising sea levels are combining with deforestation, erosion, and the degradation of soils and biodiversity. Africa has also sustained $38 billion worth of damage from extreme weather events since 2000. People and economies around the continent have already suffered severe losses. Estimates suggest the long-term gross domestic product, which is an indicator for a country's standard of living, could drop in a host of African countries. Up to 17% a year in Ivory Coast, for example, 8% in Mozambique, or 7% in Kenya. With Africa contributing only marginally to global greenhouse gas emissions, experts there are prioritizing their focus on adapting to climate change. Such measures are costly, but necessary to secure the future of Africa's 1.4 billion people.
$1 invested in effective multi-hazard early warning system is equivalent to $10 in gain in terms of protection and prevention of that. So therefore, the cost of adaptation outweighs considerably the cost of response and disaster management. So there's a great value in investing in effective early warning systems. There's a great value in investing in science-based and scientifically founded adaptation strategies.
At the current rate of warming, annual investments of $30 billion would be needed over the next decade for sub-Saharan Africa to effectively prevent future damage. But that investment could also have economic dividends. The International Labor Organization estimates that transitioning to green economies could create up to 60 million jobs in Africa by 2030.
Countries are currently spending between 2 to 9% of their GDP to tackle climate change. So it's not like we are not doing anything on the continent.
Reforestation, saving water, and agricultural initiatives are being introduced in various regions, but many are relatively small scale and are progressing slowly. This gigantic wind park in Kenya remains more the exception than the rule, due in part to a lack of money. The 2015 Paris Agreement saw government leaders renew their commitments to the Green Climate Fund to help developing nations adapt to climate change. But the fund hasn't received much of the money that was pledged.
It was agreed that by the year 2020, it will be capitalized to the tune of $100 billion per year. But we are so far away from that particular target. So in terms of resource mobilization for climate activities, we are very much not up to scratch in terms of meeting that target.
South Africa is heavily dependent on coal and is the world's 14th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Ahead of the climate conference in Glasgow, South Africa made it clear that financial issues would be key in the discussion over a potential phase-out of coal-fired plants. Environment Ministry spokesman Albi Modisa said the developed economies have a responsibility to fund the just transition to a low-carbon economy and climate-resilient society. But while money will be a major issue at the climate conference, what's most important for Africa and the global community is limiting global warming to under 2 degrees. Since 1970, droughts have claimed the lives of nearly 700,000 people across the African continent. Today, more than 400 million people live in poverty. And with accelerating climate change, this number is certain to rise.
Even if we manage to slow down global warming, the climate is already changing and will continue to change. To have any real impact, every single industry on every level will have to make important and lasting adjustments to the way they operate their businesses.
Indeed, Sandra, just consider the construction industry. According to the UN, the sector is responsible for 38% of CO2 emissions. But there are alternatives to concrete, steel and glass, as our next report from Ghana shows.
Ghana's first plastic house is an interesting sight. What looks like normal brick is actually a mixture of sand and plastic waste. The bricks, made from recycled material, are stable and good insulators.
The bricks are designed in such a way that there is a groove or hole in between, which doesn't allow the heat from outside to get in and also maintain the temperature of the room.
Ghana's capital Accra is continuously expanding. Every year, about 50,000 more people come here. Affordable housing is increasingly scarce, forcing many people to live in slums. Nima, the largest slum in Accra. 50 people live here, crammed inside this house. Hamidou Mohammed has a job as a messenger for a company, but he still can't afford his own house or apartment. The slum has no toilets and no regulated garbage disposal. Filth and waste fill the canals, including huge amounts of plastic.
This is where we always sit. Chat, eat food. We don't have any place to sit. We don't have any place to get fresh air unless this place. And this whole place is polluted.
This facility accepts waste, and it says it employs over 300 people to collect trash in the area. Today, staff will sort through 3 sacks full of bags, bottles and packaging. Depending on the quality of the plastic, the company pays the trash collectors up to 1 cedi per kilo of waste. That's equivalent to about 15 euro cents. Nelson Boateng used to be a plastic bag manufacturer himself. Then, he changed his business model. Now he wants to help solve the plastic waste problem and combat the housing problem at the same time. He designed and built both this cleaning device and the machine that breaks down and melts the plastic. The bricks are made from old melted plastics mixed with sand. Under pressure and extreme heat, a paste is formed from which the bricks are finally pressed. His facility can produce 25 bricks like this per hour. They are made of about 1/3 of recycled plastic.
So I'm so excited that I can use one problem, that's the plastic waste problem that is affecting the world, and then use that same problem to solve housing problem in Ghana.
And there's another advantage. Compared to concrete, plastic bricks are a climate-friendly building material. Cement production is responsible for about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. For many Ghanaians, cement and steel buildings signify prosperity and success, But Nelson Boateng knows that affordable property remains a major problem in Accra. His house, made of plastic bricks, is about a third cheaper than a comparable concrete house. Some construction contractors see building with plastic bricks as a chance for people to have access to their own homes.
We should go for it now so that at least any low-income person can get access to accommodation. So why do you have to wait? Because the plastic is already polluting the environment.
Their YouTube videos have helped spread the word about plastic bricks in Accra. They've received orders for 20 houses, with each dwelling requiring 3,000 plastic bricks. They have their work cut out for them.
The problem is we don't have enough equipment and space to operate to meet the customer demand. So we are still in the struggle stage to meet the customer demand because people like the product because it's cheaper and the durability.
A house with all the amenities for those who can afford it. Viewings take place every day. Recycled plastic seems to be a trend among Ghana's young urban professionals.
I think it's a win-win for me to use plastic to build houses because I'm getting a product that is much better than using regular concrete at the same time for a cheaper price whilst contributing to sustainable development.
Nelson Boateng has gained international recognition for his invention, with an invitation to this year's Plastic Recycling World Expo in Germany already in the bag.
Trees are invaluable as carbon sink, but they're not alone. Other organic matter can play a similar role. Peatlands store vast amounts of carbon, and fortunately, this type of wetland occurs in almost every country in the world. But in some places, peat is used for fuel, which turns it into a carbon emitter. Ireland has had a long tradition of harvesting peat for fuel, but now much of that activity is being suspended.
Abbeyleix Moor in Central Ireland, 500 hectares of rough, tough wetland. A peat bog, navigable only on narrow boardwalks. Every time he crosses one, Chris East feels a rush of pride. 10 years ago, plans were afoot to begin large-scale peat extraction here, but residents formed a pressure group that bought the moor and rescued this important biotope from total destruction.
What makes this plant so unique is that it actually has this wonderful, wonderful water holding capacity. Up to 25 times in its own weight. And that is why it's so important. If we take that layer of live biodiversity off, then we emit carbon. That is a decomposted or semi-decomposted layer of plant material that contains the carbon. It oxidizes. It actually emits carbon then in droves, between 6 and 15 tons per hectare per annum.
Hardly any other landscape typifies Ireland more than its moorland. It covers 17% of the country, and intact moorland is a boon for a healthy environment. Worldwide, peat bogs store twice as much carbon as woodlands, even though they only comprise 3% of the total surface area. For decades, Ireland's peat was the country's prime energy source. In some regions, 25% of households still heat with it, but slowly people are beginning to change their ways. For many years, 50% state-owned company Bord na Móna extracted peat on an industrial scale, mainly to fuel 3 power stations. The last purely peat-burning power station was shut down in 2020. At the beginning of this year, the company announced its complete withdrawal from peat extraction. Pat Merlahan says that goes far enough. Because if the work of artisanal peat cutters was banned, it would put an end to a time-honoured tradition.
As a result of re-wetting by Bord na Móna, there will be loads of places for the carbon to be taken in, loads of bogs. So into the future, the small turf cutter is just going to keep the heritage and the culture alive. So I can't see any problem at all. And I think it's very important for future generations.
Tristram White of the Peatlands Conservation Council doesn't think it's as simple as that. Moors are essential biotopes. They're home to a lot of wildlife, birds, butterflies and other insect species that are unique to the bogs. He says even small-scale peat cutting is damaging to the environment.
While the small turf cutter has not had as much impact as the industrial extraction that's occurred across the Midlands over the last 100 years, it is certainly something that we all have to be mindful of, that when we actually drain to produce turf, we're still draining the entire bog, and that has implications for the species that are living there and all the insects and also the aquatic wildlife where the silt is running into the rivers of Ireland.
Happily, one thing is for sure. The times in which Ireland's peat bogs were the source of cheap and plentiful energy are finally over. Instead, awareness has grown of their irreplaceable benefits for climate and species protection.
The health of the Mediterranean Sea is of concern to both Africa and Europe. The state of coastal waters is alarming in many areas. And now, 10 Mediterranean states want to do something about it. We go to Albania to find out more.
Yes, Chris, the University of Vlora is participating in the multinational project, and one of its researchers is already seeing promising results.
Large marine forests of Cistocera once grew all along the Albanian coast. Now the brown algae is only found in a few spots, like the Bay of Vlora, where it serves as a habitat and nursery for other aquatic life. But here too, biologists are observing an alarming increase of barren seafloor. The devastation is caused by climate change, pollution, and blast fishing. All that's left is bare stone and sea urchins, which are proliferating. All their natural predators have disappeared as a result of overfishing. Researchers have also discovered that the underwater meadows of Neptune grass, or Posidonia oceanica, are also under threat. And they're enormously important as a habitat for fish and as a carbon sink. They also help protect the beaches from erosion and filter the water. The grass is being overwhelmed by an invasive Australian species, an algae known as sea grapes or green caviar. The scientists have not yet found a way to combat the problem.
Like other invasive species, this algae has a number of advantages when it comes to competing with native species, and that degrades the marine fauna and flora, reducing biodiversity considerably.
But one of his colleagues at Vlora University is not willing to accept this creeping death underwater. 2 years ago, Ina Nasto hit upon the idea of breeding algae in the laboratory. 10 other institutes in the Mediterranean region are also participating in the project, because 80% of Mediterranean marine forests have disappeared.
We're worried about the degradation of Cistocera forests throughout the Mediterranean, but especially in Albania, where the situation is worsening. But we're now in the process of finding ways of reproducing this species and of restoring the already deteriorated environments.
And this is how it's being done. The brown algae's cells are pollinated and placed on stones, which the algae attach themselves to. The researchers then place those stones on the seabed. Scientists make regular dives to check whether the Cistocera is thriving. If all goes well, the idea could help to reforest the bottom of the sea. And that would also benefit fish populations by giving them more places to spawn.
From one type of reforestation to another, what those scientists are looking to do underwater is being done on land as well, particularly in the coastal regions. Trees help prevent soil erosion. We now go to Senegal, where we observe what can happen when the coast is exposed to the force of the sea and the difference it makes when there are trees there to protect it.
This band of trees, stretching some 200 kilometres along the coast of Senegal, forms a natural seawall. The whistling pines facing the Atlantic are suited to the rough climate. They were planted here 40 years ago.
Ici où nous sommes, c'était vraiment du sable blanc.
Right here, where we are now, was once nothing but white sand. Niayes is known for its living sand dunes. Before these trees were planted, the dunes would move with the wind and cause erosion. They covered the marshland basins and hindered agricultural activity.
60% of vegetables produced in Senegal come from the Niayes coastal region. Farmers here say conditions have improved greatly over the years.
It was only after the trees were planted that we were able to live and work the land here. At first, we could only put up temporary shelters because the sand knocked down everything in its path. Thanks to the pine trees, the sand is now stable. And because of that, we have a fertile forest and we've built homes and can cultivate vegetables.
To protect the forest over the long term, it was divided into some 200 sections. They're managed by local communities who make sure that as many trees are planted as felled. Without this natural seawall, Senegal's coast would have been inundated by the steadily rising sea level. Further north in Saint-Louis, the country's former capital, that's exactly what's happening. Saint-Louis is built on a peninsula and has always been vulnerable to the ocean's force. In 2017 and 2018, devastating floods in Saint-Louis drove over 3,000 residents from their homes. Since then, they've been living in a displacement camp, several kilometres from the seashore.
Life here is an ordeal. Our new lodgings are extremely hot, and we all live together, our entire family. We have no choice. We have to stay here because our home was totally destroyed by the sea.
The crisis is being driven by global warming, which is melting the polar ice caps. According to the UN, climate change is raising sea levels by 3.5 millimetres a year on the West African coast. And climatologists predict that levels will continue rising even if global warming is kept to a maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius in the coming years. Senegal's government has now begun building a sea barrier to fend off the Atlantic onslaught and prevent coastal erosion. Without it, the 230,000 people living here could be displaced. But some observers have doubts about the plan.
They told me this will last for a decade. I said, that's a waste. How can you spend so many millions of euros just for a decade?
Residents of the Langue de Barbarie neighbourhood are divided. Some will have to move no matter what happens. The fisherfolk are opposed to that, because it would increase their distance from the sea. But for others, the seawall offers hope.
For several years, the inhabitants of the Langue de Barbarie have been confronted with the advancing sea. But since construction started, we have become more optimistic.
The deputy mayor of Saint-Louis is one of those who hopes the project will avert further mass relocations.
The aim is to gain at least 20 meters on the coastline and thereby free up 20 meters for houses, starting from the protective wall. Then we would have 4 meters to be reforested and left to the inhabitants for recreational activities, but which will not be inhabited.
It will be a long time, however, before a 4-kilometre-long protective forest puts down solid roots here.
True, Patience is certainly required, but swift action is also urgently needed. Hopefully, the climate summit in Glasgow will bring concrete, binding results so that the coastal residents in Senegal and other places at least have a chance. Time now to say goodbye. I am Sandra Twinovidio, signing off from Kampala, here in Uganda.
Before I say farewell, do remember you can keep up with the news from COP on our social media platforms. Until next week, it's so long from me, Chris Alems, in Lagos.